And they join me now, David Birnbaum in Montreal, Emma Cunningham in Pickering, and Dan Mater in Toronto. Welcome to the CJN Daily's political panel, everybody.
Thank you for
Hello.
having us back again.
And Dan, welcome for the first time. It's great to have you with your conservative background and bona fides, and now with your own public advocacy and lobbying firm. So let's get to it. Before we get into the meat of this, and I'm not talking Seder meat, I'm talking disclosure. Could each of you, we'll start with David, just tell our audience if you have any direct affiliation or are working for any particular candidate, or so we know.
I have no horse in this race, so following it with great interest.
Same answer for me.
I can't help myself. I'm always involved. This time I did some fundraising for a few conservative candidates, and I'm helping to get out the vote for a very close friend of mine who is a candidate for the Tories.
Are you allowed to say who it is?
Yeah, Keith Roy, running in West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky country, hoping to replace one of the worst candidates, one of the worst MPs in the House, I would say, for our community, Patrick Poilievre.
Tell me why the worst. We'll get to that later, but quickly.
Yeah, I mean, look, he is no friend of Israel, to say the least. He has been, a harsh critic of Israel, a big supporter of an arms embargo. He signed on to the pledge to support, more sanctions and cutting off of Israel. And yeah, it would be good to see him replaced.
Okay, we'll get to all those in a short while. I mentioned Seder and meat, and I want to ask you, we're recording during Passover, the election is shortly after. Would each of you please, starting maybe with Emma, tell us what happened around your Seder tables? What was the discussion like in terms of the Jewish vote and the issues people were worried and concerned about?
So we do Seder with our synagogue, which is Chabad, and it is strictly non-political. So there was absolutely no discussion whatsoever about the election. However, local politicians do come out. So we had the Whitby's PC MPP, Lauren Coe, who is a huge ally of the Jewish people. I think I've mentioned that before. And we also had a regional council for Whitby, Steve Yamada, who is running for the Conservatives, and he did make a little bit of a speech. Probably stepped a little bit out of line doing that because he was really just supposed to make a speech as a regional councillor for the area. But they did come out. So there was a little bit of a push for the Conservatives, but in general, Chabad is completely politics free.
Yeah, look, I'd say it's pretty hard for these types of issues not to come up when I'm talking to friends these days. And I would say a mix. A lot of people, obviously, I think there has been a shift in the community in the last couple of years towards the right, away particularly from the NDP, but also away from the Liberals to some extent. And I think the question in a lot of people's minds is, are things going to change with Mark Carney compared to Justin Trudeau when it comes to issues of concern for our community? And if so, in which direction? And I think there was a lot of discussion and has been a lot of discussion around that question.
And you're saying the shift happened when? You said a few years ago already.
Yeah, look, I think there has been a long-term shift to the Conservatives, for the last 15, 20 years. I think that there was, probably some initial hope when Trudeau came in as Prime Minister, just as there was a lot of excitement about him among Canadians in general. And I think there has been a drift away from the Liberals over the years. And I think after October 7th, there's been a significant shift away from Liberals and even more so away from the NDP. I always say that I feel for my friends who are Jews involved, particularly with the NDP, who put many years into that party and many years into the progressive movement, only to find that the friends they thought they had weren't there for them in their hour of need.
Well, thank you, because that's my story.
We want to ask about that. I want to get David in a minute, but once you brought it up, Emma, where are the progressive Jews going in this election? As you said, the NDP is not a friend of Israel. I think last time we talked, you said you're not going to vote in the Ontario election, but are you going to vote now?
I did not. I rejected my ballot in the Ontario election. Personally, I'm planning a vote for the Liberals this time around. I don't think I'm alone in that. It's kind of gritting my teeth, but it would be harder for me to support a party that I feel actively harms me. So I'm kind of splitting the difference there.
Okay, and David, I'm sure we'll hear more about the situation in Quebec, but around your Seder table talk, what is the concerns of your guest?
Most of the discussions I have center around the one elephant in the room and one elephant who's left the room. Donald Trump, who's in the room, and Justin Trudeau, who's not on the ballot anymore. And when those discussions are colored by our Jewish sensibilities, yeah, some issues come to the table that are really big and important and existential. Will they follow us to the ballot box? My own sense is that for many people, they will only be part of the consideration when people enter the ballot box, and that Trump, in the absence of Trudeau, will shape the decisions they make.
All right, well, let's dig into that. I've been hearing so many people who are in the Jewish community that didn't want to be one issue voters since Trump came in. The one issue was Israel and anti-Semitism. Then the Trump 51st state and tariffs changed them from one issue voters to, well, maybe I need to go vote liberal, as opposed to what was like when Trudeau was still at the helm. Are you hearing more one issue voters now waffling or changing, or is that still the same, that it's only Israel and anti-Semitism that is fueling their vote? Let's open it up. Anybody can jump in.
I do think there's some one issue voters, but I think Jews, like everyone else, we're not a monolith. Israel and anti-Semitism definitely heightened priorities, especially post October 7th. But, we can't reduce Jewish political identity to just that one issue. So community safety for sure is a big concern. The rising anti-Semitism in schools. My rabbi, his kid's school was shot at 3 times. But also universities, protests, online, all major concerns. For sure, Israel, watching the stance on arms embargoes, the UN votes, supporting for UNRWA, any international legal actions like the ICC, but also things like, free expression and academic intimidation, Jewish students not feel safe on campus. And then on top of all that, the issues that everyone is worried about, like housing affordability, healthcare access, economic security, climate action. And at least from where I'm coming from, the opposition to the far right populism, including, the US style rhetoric, anything about the 51st state, definitely key issues, especially perhaps among younger Jews.
My own sense is that in the Montreal Jewish community, we want to separate the two baskets of key concerns as Jews, because I think the perception of how they're dealt with is different. If you take the whole package of Jewish security and safety here in Montreal and across the country, I think the lines are not as clearly drawn as they might have been. And again, I come back to the elephant who's left the room. The treatment of Jewish issues and the general dissatisfaction, perhaps widely expressed towards the liberals, I think, on the Israel-related basket of issues, attached a lot personally to Justin Trudeau. And he's gone. He's not on the ballot. The second basket of issues relating to all of the domestic type issues, I would suggest that even under Justin Trudeau, the perception of government performance as opposed to opposition was more mitigated. Probably a collective sense of greater dissatisfaction with liberal responses to campus activity, but less so than on Israel and Hamas related issues. So even those who are going to head to the ballot box with very much Jewish related issues top of mind, I think are now heading to the ballot box with the choice of Mark Carney versus Pierre Poilievre, and that choice being less urgent and clear with respect to who is defending them better.
Yeah, look, I agree with a lot of what David said there. I think that things really did attach to Justin Trudeau, and it became very personal. And in a way that gave some of the, the provincial governments a pass. I hear people, when people talk about the situation in schools, the situation in universities, the anti-Semitism that kids are facing, I would always hear people blame Justin Trudeau for that. And when you would talk to people and say, aren't those provincial responsibilities? Shouldn't we be talking to our provincial governments? They would say, oh yeah, but once Justin Trudeau's gone, things will be better. Which was obviously wrong. I mean, those are provincial issues. We need our provincial governments to step up and say it is unacceptable for teachers to be anti-Semitic. It is unacceptable for schools and universities to tolerate blatant discrimination against Jewish students. But I think people had this hope that there would be some shift in the culture when Trudeau left, and that would solve all these problems. Obviously, that isn't happening. And I think that, Jewish Canadians are making a big mistake at the federal level also if they think that this was all a Justin Trudeau problem and it's going to leave with Justin Trudeau. The first people in the Liberal caucus to come out in support of Mark Carney were some of the strongest critics of Israel. You have multiple members of the Liberal caucus, multiple Liberal members signing this Palestine pledge, what I like to call the Jihad pledge, pledging support for the elimination of Israel. And you've heard what Mark Carney has had to say. He has also said he supports an arms embargo on Israel while sending aid to the Palestinians. We all know that aid to the Palestinians means weapons against Israel, because that's where the aid gets diverted to. Aid to the Palestinians means pay to slay. It means paying for people to kill Israelis. And so, this is a government that is very clear. It's going to send money to the Palestinians, which will be used for weapons and to pay killers of Jews. And meanwhile, he was supporting arms embargo against Israel. So nothing has changed with Trudeau leaving. If anything, it's going to be worse. And I hear the same things David is saying, that Trudeau's gone, it's fine, we can be liberals again and be comfortable. But I think people are making a big mistake.
I do want to tell you that when Mark Carney was the leader of the Liberal Party and became prime minister, was March 20th or 21st, before he called the election. And the federal government announced, the Global Affairs Ministry announced it was giving $199 million to the Palestinians. I emailed right away because the press release did not say who's getting it. They just were general and saying NGOs and the United Nations and the Red Cross, which that's what they do. They do this announcement, and then like a couple of weeks or months later, they say who specifically it's going to. So I emailed them and I said, okay, where's it going to? Weeks went by. They finally emailed me and said, we can't tell you. Because I asked how much is going to UNRWA. And so this is Global Affairs under Carney. And this was just recently that they said, we can't tell you where it's going. We're not able to tell you. So this is my spidey sense as a journalist is like, they don't want this coming out during the election, that $90 million and half of it's going to UNRWA. They don't want that. But to go back to our focus, there's a lot of issues that you mentioned and raised about who's going to be better for Israel and for the Jews. Is it Carney or is it Poilievre? I want to bring our listeners and you to remember all the stuff that the conservative leader has done in the last, way before the election was called, in the last year and a half, to cultivate the Jewish community's vote. David, he was in Montreal. I don't know if you went to it, his barn burner speech, right, at the synagogue, way before Trudeau even left, about Am Yisrael Chai, Israel is an indigenous people. The Jews have a right to live there. He went to Israel as a kid. He's channeling Harper in his Christian beliefs about Israel and the Holy Land for the Jewish people. Is this genuine courting of the Jewish community, which is literally only 1% of the whole population? So very, very small minority of voters. What's the deal with Poilievre? Is he really the savior for Jewish people that he makes himself out to be?
I would never call anyone the savior of the Jewish people. I don't think we need a savior. I don't think we want a savior. That's kind of what we're about. What I would say is I think this is genuine. This is not courting. This is genuine. This is how he genuinely believes. I've known Pierre a long time. I've known and am quite good friends with people in his caucus like Shuv Majumder, who, if anything, is even louder in his support of our community. And I would tell you this is genuine. As you say, we make up a very small percentage of the electorate. There's only 2 or 3 ridings in the country where we make up even a significant part of the electorate, and we're not even dominant there. There is no electoral advantage in pandering to the Jewish community and trying to cultivate Jewish votes. If anything, you see right-wing parties, like in Ontario provincially, saying, you know what, the votes are in the other direction. The votes are not in the direction of the Jewish community. And therefore, it is electorally not a smart strategic move to say the kind of things that Pierre has been saying, and he knows that. He's saying them because he genuinely believes them.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yeah.
I trust that he believes them, and his speech in Montreal deeply resonated with many in the Jewish community. I would dispute whether they represent an electoral risk. I'm not sure that's true. Those who would be offended by his pro-Israel and pro-community comments are not within the potential conservative sphere of voters anyway. So I would say that it's quite easy electorally for him to do what I think is the right thing.
I've got to disagree with that. I mean, I think if you look at the Ontario election, you look at the number of Muslim candidates running for the Ontario PC party, elected for the Ontario PC party in parts of Ontario where there are increasingly large Muslim communities. I think that those communities are definitely accessible votes for conservative leaning parties.
Yeah, I reject the idea that it's us versus them, of Jews versus Muslims. I don't think that's a space that I want to get into. And I think that's a space that not a lot of us want to get into. So for sure, Israel versus Palestine may be an issue that our communities do have some disagreements on. But I think in general, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism are both particularly large, important issues. I do think that Poilievre believes what he's saying about his clear and forceful support of Israel, really strong language around anti-Semitism, efforts to defend Jewish students on campus. But I think right now, myself included, we're so focused in the way that anti-Semitism appears on the left, particularly when it comes to Israel, that we sometimes forget the strength on the right. And Poilievre, I don't know where on the spectrum he falls, but I do know he's courted a lot of people on the far right. And so there's a lot of language used, like globalists, elites, that in the past have been used as dog whistles for Jews, and that idea that we hold all the power. So globalists in particular is language that I take issue with. And I think a lot of the language he uses do have a bit of an anti-minority sentiment, and we can't eliminate the idea that we are a minority. So any sort of push against a minority is in some ways a push against us. So I think we're so focused on Israel and so focused on the way that anti-Semitism appears on the left that it's escaping notice that he's courting those votes on the far right, and that concerns me.
Don, quickly, maybe you want to just respond before I want to bring it back to Quebec.
Yeah, look, I think too often we get consumed by all the media coming out of the US, and we look at things in the US context. I think in Canada, when Pierre is talking about we shouldn't be globalists, what he is rejecting is, again, something that Justin Trudeau said, that we're a post-national state. And all the move to say we shouldn't honor our past, we should be ashamed of our past, we shouldn't be proud to be Canadians. It's been great to see everyone being proud to be a Canadian again, both the Liberals and the NDP, the last 6 weeks or 8 weeks. But these are the same people who are putting Sir John A. Macdonald statues in boxes and lowering the flag for months. And that is what Pierre has been against, to say this liberal view that we should be ashamed to be Canadian, we shouldn't honor our history, we're more about the world than about Canada. It's good to see other people come around to that now, but we shouldn't forget that this is sort of expediency. And when Pierre complains about globalists, I think that is what he is talking about.
I think that it was a very important topic because you do see, because he's a banker, former banker, he has investments in Brookfield, and those kinds of issues are going to be part of the, I'm sure, the election debates, which are coming up, which we won't be able to see until after this podcast is taped, but we'll watch for that, where he's accused of being sneaky and being hiding his money, which is that is a big who's more trustworthy. He's here for the it's not the George Soros dog whistles, as you said, of the United States election, but those words definitely have been thrown out there at him. David, last time we spoke about federal politics and Pierre Poilievre, I know you hate when I quote your old tapings to you, but in December, I think when we talked about Poilievre in Quebec, you weren't so sure that he is going to be the popular guy in Quebec, that the Bloc will still be very, very popular. He's not going to have much traction outside of maybe Montreal. Is that still true? A lot of things have changed. Trudeau's gone. How is Poilievre and the Conservatives doing in terms of the Quebec support and where the Bloc is?
Not that well. There's no doubt that the Conservative Party, is working really hard to find a beachhead in Montreal, and that would come in Mount Royal. And the polls suggest that despite a very bitter race between Anthony Housefather and Oberman, Neil Oberman, that it won't materialize, and Anthony will hold on to the riding. The play with respect to any electoral prospects, and this would require the gap to really close as a result of the debates, what could very much come into play is that traditional cross that goes through the center of Quebec and then across mid-northern Quebec, which has a long history of bouncing around to more conservative movements, Union Nationale, Bloc Québécois, and so on, in central Quebec. And the ballot question is affecting conservative possibilities there, because those ridings have sometimes three-way splits that would most often go to the Bloc, but that can go Liberal if the Bloc vote dissipates and the Conservative vote doesn't fully manifest itself. And with an increasing understanding beyond, but I personally think, including our Jewish community, the ballot question is who can deal with Trump. And that could very much have both Bloc and Conservative support dissipate in Quebec, and that the election, if not won elsewhere in the country, be won for the Liberals in Quebec.
So does it matter then to Quebecers about the language? First of all, that Carney's French is terrible and Pierre Poilievre's is a bit better. How important is that? And their stance on Bill 21 and Bill 96.
Yeah, and increasingly there's polls and streeters in Quebec showing that French Quebecers are tolerant of Carney's labored French. He says what he wants to say. It's pretty painful to listen to, but that won't be a major factor. You'll all
okay.
Probably
he said he
know
supported Hamas. Hello, and then Christian Phelan had to change it on the. I mean, it's awkward, but it's also dangerous in a way. I mean, you can't say things like that. But I'm just
he's
as an aside. Keep going.
Yeah, he's made some major gaffes. What I'm hearing is that he has to lose very badly in a French debate that'll still compete with a hockey game tomorrow night. That he'll have to stumble very badly. But like I say, it's so clear that the ballot question in Quebec is who can deal with Donald Trump. The backup ballot question is there anybody on this ballot who deeply, deeply concerns me, and I'm talking about the majority French community, on language. And there's not a clear winner. It's very surprising to hear that Pierre Poilievre would use the notwithstanding clause on the crime issues. That in our Jewish and in our English-speaking community is absolute anathema. To invoke a limiting of charter rights on questions that could touch on language if they're going to touch on crime. So that doesn't help the Conservatives in Jewish or English Quebec either.
These are so important. We could talk about all the policies on crime and safety for the Jewish community, but I'd like to, perhaps you mentioned Anthony Housefather, Neil Oberman. So let's get into some of the juicy writings that our listeners should watch across the country. There are many where even if the candidates aren't Jewish, there are majority Jewish, a lot of Jewish voters. So does anybody want to start? Should we go east? Should we go west to east? You were talking out west, Dan, earlier at the beginning about the candidate you're supporting. We've got Avi Lewis for the NDP again. and we have Tamara Cronus for the PC in Nanaimo. The candidate you were talking about out west. Who should we be watching for?
Yeah, look, I think there are a few very interesting races. I think Elizabeth May is another one, the Green Party leader. I think that, if current polling holds, she's likely to lose. I think Avi Lewis has been a great concern for a lot of people in the community. If he wins, he will almost certainly run for leader of the NDP, and I think would have a good shot at winning that. I think right now he looks like he's going to lose. I would say, riding like West Vancouver, Keith Roy, give that a watch too, but that's partly I'll be there election night trying to help him win, so we'll see. Look, I think there are a few others. Everyone is going to be watching, Jagmeet Singh and some of the other NDP members and see how far this slide in NDP support goes.
And then Winnipeg. Well, first of all, Marty Morantz, and then there's Leah Gazan and Ben Carr. Those are three Jewish MPs from different parties. How are they going to do? Are they going to be reelected?
I think that Marty's in for a tough fight. He's been a good MP, but he's in for a tough fight with Liberal support increasing. I think that, we have started to see a swing back in favor of the Conservatives, particularly in the West. And hopefully that's enough to save him. I think that Leah Gazan may be still threatened by the Liberal, wave there. And that, that should make Ben Carr pretty safe.
Let's move east a little bit. We're going to go to some Ontario ridings in the GTA. People are very interested in Yara Sachs versus Roman Baber for the Conservatives. There was a billboard I don't know who did it, put up on the Bathurst, main Bathurst intersection in her riding, showing her shaking hands with Mahmoud Abbas and that fateful trip that she and Melanie Joly took in March, which was a big turning point for her support in the Jewish community. Does anybody have any thoughts on that race? Who's likely to win?
Yeah, I think when we last talked in December, we were saying that she was probably going to lose her riding. But I think since then, we've seen the pendulum swing towards the Liberals, whereas before Poilievre looked like a bit of a shoo-in. And frankly, I think she's going to win that riding. I spend a fair bit of time there, even though I don't live there. And I see a lot of signs for her, a lot of support. And as we've said already today, Jewish population is 1%. That's, there are certainly Jewish people there, but I wouldn't say it's a Jewish riding. And I think, looking at polls, she's likely to win.
Anybody else have any comments on some other GTA ridings? Dan, this is your hood.
Yeah, look, I think people can watch Karen Stintz. I think that increasingly is sort of the
Eglinton Lawrence,
And so I know a lot of efforts going in there, and I think that's one of the ridings in particular in Toronto you really need to watch.
They're not
another riding I'm watching. Another riding I'm watching is Davenport. Sandra Sousa is the NDP candidate there. She organized Davenport for Palestine, which is a grassroots group that advocates for Palestinian solidarity. Not always a bad thing, right? They could use some help right about now. But what's unfortunate about her is that the Jewish community in Davenport has been asking for a sit down with her, and she's refusing to meet with them. And that tells me a little bit about which Palestinian organization she's likely to support. So I'm hoping the Liberal MP, who's the incumbent there, unfortunately, I didn't look up how to pronounce her last name before coming on this, but I'm hoping the Liberal candidate will take that seat, because I think Sandra Sousa is a risk for the Jewish community. It makes me very nervous that she's refusing that sit down.
We also forgot Evan Solomon. Big time Canadian former broadcaster, moved to the States to be a publisher, came back to Canada to run in this election for Mark Carney, as Mark Carney came back to Canada to run. And he's running in Toronto Centre. He's a star candidate, Jewish, high profile. Is he likely to win?
Almost certainly. I mean, it's a pretty safe Liberal seat. Even the Liberals are struggling. They're winning that seat. And so, it would be shocking to not see Evan win.
What about Toronto St. Paul's? The Tories took it last by-election, which was Don Stewart, but Leslie Church is back. And if you're saying the Liberals are maybe going to turn the tide again and take that seat back, is that a thing? She apologized. She's reaching out to the Jewish community more.
Yeah, look, I would say Leslie is definitely a friend of the community. I know her personally. And, Don has also been great. I think we're very lucky as a community to have both Liberal and conservative candidates there who are friends. I think Don has done a great job in a short time in Parliament and definitely does deserve to be reelected. But he's definitely up for a fight. I know he's putting up a fight, but it's definitely a fight. And with Leslie there.
And we should also mention, of course, in Ottawa, two major important races. First of all, Nepean is where Mark Carney is running, and there's there's 2 or 3 shuls there out of the 6 that are in Toronto. Mark Carney went to Rabbi Michael Berg's, which is a Reform temple synagogue rabbi, before Pesach to make matzah balls and do a little video about how Jewish he is. But apparently he hasn't courted the community at all until that video in Nepean. And I'm getting this from sources who watch this. So, and then there's another writing, which is Joel Harden, who's not a friend of Israel's. Emma, tell me a little bit about that race.
Oh, I have some opinions on Joel Harden. I think we're a few years out from the time when he said that when he knocks the door of a clearly Jewish home, he immediately asks them for their stance on Israel because, we're all responsible for a foreign country. He wore a Palestine pin when he knocked the doors of Jewish community. So just deliberately aggravating and upsetting the community for his own, I'm not going to say amusement, but his own feelings. I find him really upsetting, so I don't follow him the way that he used to. I've kind of taken a bit of a step back from tracking the NDP's movement as closely as I did when I walked out of the party. But I would certainly never want to see Joel Harden retain his seat. That kind of deliberate antagonization of the community, whether he's still doing it or not, I think is unforgivable.
Okay. Anything that anybody else want to remember? Karina Gould, she was a cabinet minister in Burlington, and she's up for a fight. They had to cancel one of her all candidates debates because a local, I think it was Maxime Bernier's gang were going to do a march to the church where she was having a debate. And I don't know if she was dropped from cabinet under Carney. I don't know if she'll get reelected in Burlington. She's been there. It'll be 10 years for her. But she said she was a Zionist on her interview, but yet she gave money to UNRWA and voted with her government on all the anti-Israel policies. So is there anyone else we're forgetting? David, anybody else besides Anthony and Neil Oberman in Montreal that are worth a quick check?
Well, Rachel Bandayan, who's in that short-lived cabinet, will surely win a very, very safe riding in Outremont. And the polls suggest that a Jewish candidate will win in Mount Royal, and that it'll likely be the incumbent, Anthony. I think it's worth remembering with some humility that our community's collective electoral clout is somewhat limited. And it reminds us that political influence goes so far beyond how we vote collectively and includes in all its diversity the real importance of continuing to have elected and involved Jewish voices across the political spectrum. So you get to Karina Gould without commenting on her own record, and you think, or I think about the importance of having strong, diverse Jewish community influence on the workings of government. And that means the desirability of having elected Jewish members and, of course, others who are deeply sensitive to and understanding of the issues that matter to us.
Look, I think what we need to do is support those in all the parties who are friends of our community and friends of Israel. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes there aren't a lot of those running in some parties, but we have to do what we can to find those people and support them. That doesn't necessarily just mean supporting the Jewish candidates. but finding those who are supportive and our friends and supporting them. And yes, we don't want to end up in a situation where there's only one party that supports us. We only get support when they're in power and otherwise not. But on the other hand, we can't allow people to take us for granted. And so we have to hold people accountable when they support interests that are against us.
People remember that when Stephen Harper was prime minister, everyone now thinks he's the best friend the Jews ever had. He never recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel, which I'm not saying we should or shouldn't, but Canada didn't do that. They didn't move the embassy to Jerusalem, which Pierre Poilievre's people said they would do. The Liberals didn't either. So despite history is important to remember, right? And the Liberals did apologize for the MS St. Louis and the anti-Semitism against Jews back from the war. And currently they brought in the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which needs to be, debated at another time, not here. They also put millions of dollars, both governments, under Harper and under the Liberals, for security at synagogues and Jewish schools, started under the Conservatives and then now boosted up by the Liberals, and will probably continue, as Poilievre said, under his government if he wins too. So we have to remember this. It's not just all eggs in one basket. I guess the thing that strikes me the most about articles that Steve Paikin wrote this too, he's going to be doing the debate. He wrote this for TVO, and he said, it's not so much about what the parties do for the Jewish community. It's the tone, the forcefulness, as you said, the full-throated support for Jewish issues and for human rights issues. It's not just Jewish issues. These are human rights issues, equal rights, civil rights issues that a politician does. And I wonder if the tone is important in this election as we come close to the debates and then the vote.
I'm not a fan of tone with no action. I've been doing a lot of anti-Semitism work out here in Durham region, talking to councils, doing panels at the library. And what I typically end off with each time is, it's great that you're passing this motion. It's great that you're doing this session on anti-Semitism. It's great that you're doing this, but you can't do this and pat yourself on the back and say, hey, great, I did a thing. You always have to be asking yourself, what's next? What's the follow-up? How do I build upon this? How do I do something with the information I have now? And you can say things forever, but if I don't see your actions back up your words, then to me, that's, I don't want to say worse, but it's not good. And so I respect people on this issue and other issues who follow up and say more than hollow words. And Joel Harden, when I left the NDP and when I had that issue, Joel Harden reached out to me, supported me, and then turned around and did all the things he did. So it's great that you have some words, but when your actions contradict what you're saying, I'm not interested.
I think that sums it up very well. I think there are a lot of, again, going back to the provincial level, I think there are a lot of governments across Canada whose leadership has said all the right things. But you look at the situation, for instance, for Jewish kids in schools, and I don't see any action being taken. So you need action.
I think it was the Conservatives said they would defund woke anti-Semitic universities, which is a provincial matter. Nobody's doing that. No one has done that in the 18 months since October 7th anywhere. It's a Trumpy thing, but it's part of the conversation. It's part of the conversation, especially McGill and Concordia. Oh my God, like they're smashing windows where you live.
Oh, which is absolutely terrible. But we also have to be careful about pretending there are monolithic Jewish approaches to these issues. That kind of statement about the banning woke reactions is a state. It leaves open all kinds of doors to the notion of suppressing individual liberties and freedoms, which is pretty dear and cherished by Jewish traditional and community values. So there's shades of gray to our Jewish preoccupations as well, and to the way we react to certain unequivocal statements about dealing with issues that matter to us. So lots of
Yeah,
shades of gray in all of this.
we can't pretend that there is any kind of freedom of speech on universities today. There's freedom of speech for the hard left. And those to the right, and particularly our community, are discriminated against. And I think what the Conservatives are talking about is trying to restore that balance and end some of this discrimination that our community suffers from, but that others do too.
Okay. And lastly, do you believe the polls? That's a thing that's been on all the, campaign coverage the last few days. Is it going to, we need to have predictions, and I will send you my gifts afterwards to see who's right. All right, Dan, we know you're the conservative
Look,
backroom
I believe
boy,
the
but
polls. 100% I believe the polls, but I believe the polls can swing just as they've moved in the last few months. I think things are going to tighten up, and I think things are going to move back in favor of the Conservatives, just as they have started to do over the last few days. And so I'm predicting a Conservative minority government.
minority, which is a huge difference from a 25-point lead before Trump and Trudeau. Okay, wow. Emma.
I also believe the polls. I think the biggest issue is complacency. If Liberal polls retain the lead and people start thinking, oh, I don't have to go out because they're going to win, that's when you lose badly. So I think complacency is a big issue. Always. But I think we've seen solid enough trends. Polls, we've almost seen conservatives and liberals flip in a lot of ridings. My riding was 99% chance of a conservative win when the conservative candidate put her name forward, and flipped to a 99% chance of a liberal win. And that happened almost overnight when Trudeau stepped down. And since he stepped down, I've only really seen things go up since Carney was elected. So are things tweaking slightly to the Conservatives over the past couple of days? Sure, but not on a scale where I think they're going to take the lead. So I'm predicting a liberal government. And frankly, I'm on the fence as to whether it's going to be a minority or majority.
Before we end with David, the stats, the voter turnout in 2021, 76% of eligible Canadians reported voting, according to Statistics Canada. So that is a very important factor. 3/4 voted. So I'm sure the interest is higher in this election, just from everyone's talking about this. It'll be very interesting to see. David, do you believe the polls?
Yes, I do, and I do think the turnout will be high. I do think the gap is closing. I believe the polls very much in that the NDP's collapse will be close to total. The jury is out on how well the Bloc will do in Quebec still. But I believe the gap will not close enough to prevent what will be at least a slim Liberal majority. I see the hill as much too big to climb with respect to Pierre Poilievre in not having, like I say, engaged those who haven't decided to vote for him yet. And I see great potential for Mark Carney to look a little bit more human in the remaining days, and maybe a little more passionate, which I think will motivate those who are not quite in the Liberal camp yet to secure that at least slight Liberal majority.
Right. This has been fascinating. I can't wait to speak to you guys on election night after the results. Thank you so much for being on the CJN Daily's political panel. David, Emma, and Dan, for your first time. And our listeners should tune in to our CJN coverage online, as well as on our social media the night and the morning after the election. Thanks a lot, all of you, for being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.